In part one of the series, we introduced Jake and his family's multi-generational farm, 3 Ryan's Farm. Let's dive back into that conversation and pick up with challenges in agriculture. And multi-generational farms really is what we wanted to talk to you today about, Jake, because you have such a long-standing family history of seeing that succession planning, that those challenges, those successes. So let's maybe start with the challenges, because I'm sure working with family, as we all know, working in family farms, it comes with a lot of challenges. But, I think you maybe mentioned before in passing with me that you face not only challenges probably with dealing with family, but you also guys face some unique challenges being out in Western Australia, not having access to reliable labor and other things like that. What are some of the current challenges, maybe related to the multi-generational aspect, but just farming in general, that you guys deal with there on your farm?
So we'll start with the first question about family. So I think working with family, there's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be disagreements. So when I first returned to the farm, I was pretty, green. I wasn't really sure how things were done, but I was pretty keen on the whole regenerative farming aspect. So while I was at uni, Joel Sallerson came to town. So he came to town, did a presentation in Manjimup. My dad, my uncle, my granddad went to it. And they got, hooked on the bandwagon of the whole regen farming, Joel Sallerson style. So I went back and I started a chicken operation, which is where the pasture-raised chickens come from now. But Dad told me all about this bloke. So while I was at uni, I started Googling Joel Sallerson, and then I got onto people like Gary Zimmer, John Kemp, Jerry Brunetti, Alan Savory. I suppose these farmers that were doing things a little bit different. Well, I suppose very different. So I came actually to the farm. First 12 months, I was pretty learn the ropes. I just sort of stepped back and tried to learn how things were done. But I suppose after a year or so, I started trying to implement these regenerative practices. And I suppose at the time, they were very new, very out there. So myself and my dad, you have a few, discussions or arguments about it now and then. But I think it's important because it opened up, made us think about how we want to change the farm and where our future direction wanted to go. And it's one of those things, it's like everyone's perspective is different based on their past experiences. So I suppose I was watching and learning all about this regenerative farming and why this would work, where Dad's past experiences were he experienced a crop failure because of insects attacking it. So he knew how important the pesticides were, where I thought we could combat it with nutrition and using softer chemicals. So we used to butt heads a fair bit on that. But I think the big turning point on that was we grew a summer cover crop. So in Australia, our growing season is winter. Summertime, it's dry, nothing grows, no one grows any crops. All our crops are winter normally. Our vegetables are summer, but they're irrigated. So we grew this summer cover. I wanted to plant some sunflowers and some maize and a mixed species cover crop. So I planted it. And at the time, my dad and my granddad were pretty sceptical. Like, it doesn't rain, it's not going to grow, it's too hot, no one does it. Like, at the time in Manjimup, no one grew any cover crops. It just wasn't a thing. So we grew this cover crop, and it was about waist high, and we're driving past it, and Granddad would be like, oh, it's going to die. It's too hot, it's too dry, it's not going to grow. It had 5 mils of rain, and that was all the rainfall it had. It grew as tall as me, which is, I'm pretty tall, I'm 2 metres tall, flowered, and yeah, it was a real eye-opener. It started the conversation that some of these practices might work. And then we started trialling all these new ideas, the holistic grazing, the mineral nutrition, foliar feeding, and strip till. So, but it all came down to that first discussion about how we want to do it. And I suppose the arguments were always good because it made me learn, I had to learn the subject in which I wanted to do really well, so I could have my reasons. This is why it's going to work. This is why this won't happen. So that when we had the discussion, I could answer the questions Dad would have about the subjects. And I think Dad would always ask the questions to make sure I knew what I was talking about before we implemented it. And we always started small, and then we did the trial and we proved if it was going to work or if it wasn't going to work, and then we'd expand. So I think being the multi-generational, I suppose at that time it was myself, my granddad, and my dad. My granddad's no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago. But at that time, it was three of us sort of farming together. And I suppose you've got to be patient and have those discussions, and I suppose have a few arguments and really explain to each other what your idea is and why it will work. So, yeah, it can be challenging, but I think at the end of the day, it's quite good to have family on, like working with family and having a farm together.
Okay, let's talk challenges just in general for Three Ryan's Farm. Labor is a big one right now, and a lot of farmers worldwide are having that issue. It's not necessarily specific or unique to your farming operation.
No, it isn't, but for us, it was a big issue. For the last 2 years, COVID really caused a lot of issues for us. So our workforce is mainly seasonal workers. They're generally backpackers, people coming in from Europe and America and whatever country it may be, come to Australia to travel Australia and I suppose have a working holiday. So in Australia, if you work 80 days or more on a farm, you get granted a second year visa. So if you want to stay for 2 years, travel around Australia, because it's so big, it takes you 2 years to get around it, really. So to stay 2 years, you'll work 80 days on a farm. So our main workforce was, backpackers, mainly from Italy, France, the UK, Germany were probably the big four. So they'd come in and they'd harvest our crops and would pay them, sign them off on their days, and they'd get the second year visa. Then COVID happened, and obviously our international borders shut, and we lost our workforce. So for 1 year there, we had to just sort of harvest the crops ourselves and find what labour we could. The issue is because our crops are seasonal, we only have work for 4 to 6 months a year. Locals don't want part-time work. They're obviously chasing job security, 12 months work kind of thing. And because the mining industry is also so strong in Western Australia, you can go onto the mines with no qualification and be a tradie assistant and earn $100,000 a year. So picking cauliflowers for $50,000 a year doesn't really cut the mustard. So last year we ended up getting Tongans, people from Tonga, through the Pacific Islanders scheme, and they came in and they were lifesavers. They were pricey because you had to pay for them to come over and their quarantine and whatnot, but they got the crops harvested, so at least we could get the crops to market and I suppose feed the country.
In part 3 of this series, we're going to end things on a high note discussing opportunities for multi-generational farms.